It is oft declared that certain moments linger in the shadows of one's memory for all eternity. They linger like phantoms, hushed yet ever present. Lo, it hath been 2 years since that fateful day. 2 years since all was transformed. It was meant to be a straightforward affair. A jaunt to the shore with my dear son Leonard. Mine own spouse, Phoenix, could not attend, as he hath oft failed to do. Labor ever took precedence, and I had grown accustomed to such a state, familiar with the solitude that accompanied it. Yet that day did not bear the semblance of the ordinary. Neither in that moment nor in the present reflection. We did unfurl the linens, whilst the sun did cast its warm embrace. Perchance a touch too fervent. I reclined, at last unburdened by the clamour of existence, and I beseeched Leonard to lend his hand, to anoint my back with soothing oil. Never did I ponder upon the matter, for he is my progeny, my cherished lad. What reason would I have to do so? In the beginning, it was naught but his hands, merely aiding me in my plight. Yet, in that moment, I sensed his presence, descending ever so gently, and I made no move to halt his advance. Why did I not intervene in his course? Thou dost believe thou art well acquainted with thine own self, and with thine kin, yet there exists a singular instant, a fleeting breath, that hath the power to unweave the very fabric of all thou holdest dear. On that fateful day, upon this very shore, a transformation took hold of me, and since then, I have walked a path forever altered. For more than a decade and a half, the bond between Phoenix and I hath flourished in the sacred union of matrimony. If thou didst inquire of any who were acquainted with us, they would declare us the ideal pair, of fair abode, virtuous offspring, and a life of steady course. Yet, the fissures remain unseen until one dwells within the confines, and the void is but a whisper to those who do not inhabit its depths. For many a year, the toil of Phoenix consumed his very existence. He toiled incessantly, through the twilight hours, on the Sabbath, and during the festive seasons. In days of yore, I would oft convince mine own heart that his toil was for our sake, that the hours spent in labor and the fervent devotion were but the foundation of the life he sought to craft for our kin. Yet, after such an extended passage of time, that tale begins to unravel. What worth hath a dwelling if it be ever unoccupied? When he returned to his abode, I found myself rendered unseen, for he scarcely cast a glance in my direction. He ceased to inquire of my heart's desires, my yearnings, and my necessities. Our discourse was brief and to the point, revolving chiefly around matters of expenses, provisions, and the offspring. He cherished Leonard and his dear sister, Isla, yet even in their company, his essence lingered like a spectre. He was present in form, yet absent in essence. I would oft find myself seated at the table opposite him, pondering whether he perceived my presence in the least. On that morn, I recall my stance within the kitchen as Phoenix did hasten forth from the threshold. He seized his satchel, bestowed a gentle kiss upon the crown of Isla's head, and cast a fleeting glance in my direction. Alas, dear Freya, I must beg thy pardon, for I am unable to attend this day, as an unforeseen matter hath arisen in mine occupation. I did not engage in dispute, but merely acquiesced with a nod, as was my custom, whilst my throat constricted with unspoken words. I did assure myself that all was well, for Leonard and I could venture forth alone. In those days, young Leonard was but 16, a figure of height and slenderness, possessing the same brown orbs as his sire. Yet his visage bore a gentler countenance. He spoke little, not even when I revealed that it would be but the two of us. Verily, it seems he hath grown accustomed to his sire's frequent departures as well. With a mere shrug, he seized the bags and trailed behind me to the carriage. I beheld him in the passenger seat as we journeyed forth, earbuds nestled in his ears, gazing out the window as youths are oft wont to do. Mine heart could not refrain from a smile. Lo, he doth grow with such swiftness, and at times I ponder if I shall but blink and find him lost to me as well. The journey to the shore seemed to stretch into infinity. My thoughts meandered, as they oft did, to that sun-kissed realm of Phoenix. In contemplation of yore, I find my mind adrift upon the myriad of joys we once shared, those evenings spent in the embrace of cinema, the leisurely strolls beneath the stars, and the aimless journeys embarked upon solely for the delight of the experience. Upon reflection, I pondered the manner in which his hand would caress mine, and how his gaze would ignite with joy upon my arrival. In many a year, I had not known such sensation, naught had stirred within me. For I was weary beyond measure of remaining in the shadows, unnoticed and unacknowledged. At long last, we did arrive, and Leonard, ever the gallant companion, lent his strength to bear the burdens to a serene nook by the waterside. I spread the linens upon the ground whilst he erected the shelter from the sun's fierce gaze. In a moment most curious, I found myself compelled to engage with him, perchance due to the fact that he stood alone amidst the throng. Perchance I merely sought a soul to lend an ear to my plight. Verily, 'tis a pleasure to venture forth. Dost thou not agree? I uttered, striving to convey a spirit of mirth. He merely inclined his head, brushing his locks aside with a gentle motion of his hand. Indeed, dear mother, it is quite pleasant. Upon the soft fabric I reclined, as the golden rays of the sun did embrace my skin with their warm caress. I remained motionless for a time, surrendering to stillness as though seeking to shed the burdens of the years gone by. If only for a fleeting hour. Yet, in a moment of reflection, the oil came to mind. I arose from my repose and directed mine gaze towards Leonard. Pray, wouldst thou lend thy hand to assist me in applying this upon my back? I did inquire. Alas, I find myself unable to grasp it alone. He cast a glance my way. A fleeting moment of uncertainty, ere he seized the vessel from my grasp. I reclined once more, my visage turned towards the cloth, and there I lingered in anticipation. The initial caress was tender, cautious in its approach. His hands trembled, as if he feared to cause me pain. A gentle smile graced my lips, for it called to mind the days of yore, when he, but a wee lad, would clasp my hand as we ventured forth to cross the thoroughfare. In yonder days, his hands were but diminutive in size. Thou mayest apply a touch more force, I did advise him. Mine utterance stifled. All is well. He hearkened, and his hands did strengthen as he anointed my shoulders and glided down my back with the oil. I didst shut mine eyes and sought to concentrate on the warmth, the cadence of his caress. Forsooth, in a fleeting instant, I permitted mine own self to revel in its delight. So lengthy was the span since any hand had graced my form. And that notion struck me with a force I was loath to confess. Yet, in that moment, I sensed his hands descend, gently and with great care, along the graceful arc of my back. My breath was ensnared within my throat, and I did part my lips to utter a word, yet naught did emerge. My thoughts did whirl with fervent haste, yet I remained mute. I did assure myself it was well, that he merely offered aid, that my thoughts were but figments of fancy. Yet I was not. His hands did linger for a brief instant, poised at the boundary where my towel did cease. In that moment, I sensed his uncertainty, mirrored by my own, and rather than halting his course, I uttered the words, "All is well. Thou mayest also apply thine hand in that place." The utterance lingered in the atmosphere, akin to a venomous mist, and as soon as they escaped my lips, I was acutely aware that they were beyond retrieval. Leonard spake not a word. He did not cease, either. I didst shut mine eyes tight and felt his hands upon me, lower than they ought to have been. Mine heart did thump with such fervor that I feared he might catch its echo. Desire stirred within me to rise, to speak forth and bid him cease. Yet I remained still, silent in my resolve. I found myself unable to do so. I permitted it to unfold. Even at this moment, the reason eludes me still. Perchance it was the solitude that didst weigh heavily upon the heart. Perchance I was overly eager to seek affection, albeit in a manner most improper. Perchance I found myself devoid of concern henceforth. Upon that fateful day by the shore, all within me shattered, and naught would ever return to its former state. Pray, if thou hast journeyed thus far into this tale, I extend my gratitude for thy steadfast companionship. Though it may be a weighty truth to bear, I am grateful for thine attentive ear. If thou dost find this visual tale engaging, or if thou dost believe there exists a soul who may resonate with the musings I impart, I beseech thee to take a moment to bestow a like upon this creation and to subscribe forthwith. It doth greatly assist me in the continual sharing of tales such as this, and assures me that I am not solitary in this vast expanse. Verily, let us return to our endeavor. Upon the morrow of that fateful day by the shore, a change didst unfold. It was impossible to dismiss the tempest of emotions within me, the visions that danced before mine eyes, and the gaze that Leonard cast upon me in the aftermath. It was not merely a fleeting glance or an ephemeral instant. It was unyielding. Each time our gazes met, a peculiar essence lingered within him, an ineffable quality that I longed to define yet found impossible to ignore. I endeavored to inter it deep within the earth's embrace. Upon our return to the abode that eve, I endeavored with all my might to maintain an air of normalcy. With great toil, I prepared the evening repast, inquiring of Leonard the matters of his scholarly pursuits. As the hours waned, I engaged in the folding of garments, my hands trembling throughout the labor. In my mind, I didst revisit each moment that transpired. His hands, the manner in which he tarried, the strain I sensed within my own form. Mine own heart was filled with loathing, both for myself and for him. Who didst compel me to harbor such feelings towards my own progeny? The phoenix, in its oblivion, perceived naught around it. He returned to his abode in the late hours. As is his custom, his cravat askew, his visage weary, he pressed his lips to my cheek, a mere shadow of the fervor that once ignited our souls. After a day that stretched on like a weary tale, I inquired, yearning for a spark of discourse. With a grunt and a nod, he made his way, already traversing the distance to the chamber of leisure. It hath ever been thus. His presence seemed but a fleeting whisper, leaving me to dwell in the shadows once more, unseen and unheard. Upon that eve, I reclined in my chamber, gazing at the ceiling whilst Phoenix did gently gnaw beside me. The abode lay in stillness, yet my thoughts did not find repose. My thoughts did linger upon Leonard, upon the grace of his hands and the depth of his gaze. In my heart, I sensed the wrongness of the course before me. I understood that I ought to halt it, whatever this tempest might be, ere it ventured further into the abyss. Yet, within me dwelt another essence, a shadowed fragment, a solitary yearning that longed to grasp it, that hungered for the gaze, the caress, the sensation of being acknowledged. The days did wane, and Leonard spoke not a word, yet his silence rang with a clamor more profound than any utterance. He did not shun my presence, not in so many words. Instead, it seemed as though he drew nearer still. He would gaze upon me as I prepared the meal, as I tidied the abode, as I lingered in solitude upon the settee in the stillness of night. And I did permit it to unfold. I did not hinder his course. I did not restrain mine own self. Then arrived the subsequent weekend. The air was once more suffused with heat, rendering the abode oppressive and stifling. Gone was the phoenix, engaged in some final scheme, leaving Leonard and me in solitude, reminiscent of times past. Less than text, I inquired of him whether he desired to return to the shore. Just the two of us in solitude. Alas, the reason for my actions eludes me. Perchance I believed that the embrace of the great outdoors might aid in unclouding my thoughts. Perchance I sought to challenge mine own spirit, to discern if I could cast aside all that burdens me. The journey unfolded in a hushed manner this time. Leonard, alas, did not don his earbuds, though, there he sat, gazing through the pane, his knee a tempest of restless motion. In a moment fraught with stillness, I yearned to utter a phrase, any phrase, to shatter the oppressive quietude, yet, each time I sought to speak, the very words congealed upon my tongue. Refusing to take flight, upon our arrival at the shore, the expanse lay nearly desolate. Mine eyes do recall the azure hue of the water, and how the gentle breeze did caress my visage. Once more, I did unfurl the towels, as I had done in times past, whilst Leonard lent his hand to arrange all with care. This time, I did not beseech him to anoint my back with oil. I found myself unable to do so. Instead, I reclined there with mine eyes shut, feigning that all was well. Yet, though mine eyes were closed, I could sense his watchful stare upon me. Mine senses did perceive his gaze upon me. The true moment of rupture arrived as the afternoon waned. We resolved to cleanse ourselves at the seaside fountains ere we returned to our abode. It was meant to be a swift endeavor, merely to rid ourselves of the grains that clung to our flesh. Yet, an event did unfold that remains beyond my comprehension. Upon our arrival at the cascading waters, Leonard did take the lead. Stepping forth to allow the liquid to flow down his back, I lingered in the shadows, observing him for a brief spell ere I too did venture forth. In a moment of unbidden impulse, I cast aside my garments and took my place beside him, the refreshing water caressing my skin. Leonard gazed upon me, his countenance a portrait of surprise. Whether it was astonishment, bewilderment, or some other sentiment altogether, he remained silent, uttering not a single word. Upon casting mine eyes upon him, I didst truly behold him, and spake thus: Thou oughtest to remove thy shorts as well, for a thorough cleansing is in order. Alas, the reason for my utterance eludes me. Perchance I sought to demonstrate unto myself that I could wield dominion, that I could bring this to a halt. Or mayhap I was putting him to the test, as well as my own resolve. With a moment's pause, he acquiesced to my request, drawing his shorts down with a deliberate motion. And there we found ourselves, entwined in solitude, as the rain cascaded upon us, cleansing all but the fervent emotions we shared. I averted my gaze from him and, in a gentle whisper, implored, "Assist me with my burden." And he obliged. His hands, once more, moved with a cautious grace, yet the air was thick with an unmistakable strain. In him, I sensed a stirring. Within myself, I perceived the same. Upon the gentle caress upon my waist, I found myself ensnared in a moment of stillness. The atmosphere grew dense, as the murmurs of the water enveloped all other sounds. Alas, I might have turned my back. I might have brought an end to this tale. Yet, I did not retreat, rather, I inclined my form. Drawing nearer to him, I did extend my hands towards his, leading them gently to my breast. And in that moment, he did not withdraw. What transpired henceforth, I cannot elucidate, nor shall I endeavor to do so. It was a fleeting instant, a haze of yearning, solitude, and an unnamed sentiment that lingers in the shadows. It was neither gentle nor languid, rather, it was fervent and filled with urgency. In every manner misguided, yet I found myself unable to halt its course. Nor did I desire to do so. And when the final act had drawn to a close, we remained there, the deluge cascading upon us, cleansing the traces yet leaving the verity untouched. He embraced me then, embraced me as none other had in many a year, and I surrendered to his touch. In the aftermath, our tongues lay still. We didst dry ourselves, gathered our belongings, and made our way back to the carriage in a solemn hush. I beheld Leonard from the periphery of mine eye, his visage aglow, his gestures rigid and constrained. Alas, I perceived that I had brought ruin upon all that was dear. In that moment, I discerned we had traversed a threshold that could ne'er be retraced. And yet, for the first time in many a year, a spark of vitality coursed through my veins. The journey back was initially shrouded in silence. The carriage seemed constrained, burdened, as though the very atmosphere bore down upon us with relentless weight. With a firm grasp upon the wheel, I endeavored to direct mine attention to the path ahead. Yet my thoughts did whirl in tumultuous disarray. Yet still, I sensed him, Leonard, his touch, his form, the burden of all that we had just accomplished. I found mine eyes oft wandering towards him in the chariot's passenger seat. He sat rigidly, gazing through the pane, his countenance aglow, his jaw clenched in silent turmoil. And then, as if summoned from the ether, he did utter his words. "Mother," he uttered, his tone subdued, verging on uncertainty. I averted mine gaze from him. I found myself unable to do so. Yet I did hear him. "What dost thou mean? What transpired yonder? Pray tell?" Mine heart didst leap with fervor. For a fleeting instant, I contemplated feigning ignorance to his utterance, of dismissing it with a wave, and diverting the discourse to another matter. Yet, the veil of pretense could no longer be upheld. Not in the wake of our deeds. I drew in a tremulous breath and responded, "Verily, I find myself in a state of uncertainty. Verily, it was the truth, or perchance the nearest semblance thereof. In truth, I found myself in a state of bewilderment, unaware of the events that had transpired or the reasons behind them." All that I perceived was that naught remained as it once was. Our discourse ceased until we arrived at the threshold of our abode. I did cease the chariot's motion. Yet neither of us stirred from our place. At last, Leonard cast his gaze upon me, truly beholding my presence. And for the first time, I beheld a glimmer in his gaze that filled my heart with dread. It was neither bewilderment nor remorse, nor yet the weight of disgrace. It was a yearning most profound. For what span of time dost thou harbor such sentiments? He did inquire. His utterances did indeed send a shiver through my very being, for I had been pondering the selfsame inquiry. Upon gazing upon him, a torrent of emotions surged forth within me, as if a great barrier had been shattered. I know not, I murmured softly, perchance a span more extended than I am inclined to confess. We remained silent thereafter, merely occupying our seats in the shadows. I fancied that this would be the end, that we would retreat within, endeavor to cast aside all memories and feign that naught had transpired. Yet Leonard harbored thoughts of a different nature. Ere I could unfasten the portal, he did lean forth and bestow upon me a kiss. It began with a gentle touch, timid and uncertain, as though he feared I might withdraw from his embrace. Yet I did not. I permitted his lips to meet mine, and in turn, I reciprocated the embrace, and thus I did relinquish all command. Whether it was the solitude that enveloped me, the passage of many a year in disregard, or the gaze of Leonard, which pierced through the veil of time and touched my heart as none had done in ages, I cannot say, yet I allowed it to unfold. In that very moment, just beyond the threshold of our abode, Leonard drew me close, his hands gliding over my form as if they were destined to rest there. I did feel most vibrantly alive. I sensed a yearning for my presence. I felt acknowledged, for the first time in many a year. Naught else did weigh upon my heart. Alas, the measure of time eludes me as we remained entwined in one another's embrace. Yet, in due course, we ventured within. Mine eyes do not recall the path that led to yonder portal. Yet the sensation of his grasp upon my own lingers still, the silence betwixt us thrumming with a vibrant energy. We did not exchange words. We found no necessity for such an action. Once we crossed the threshold, all manner of fervor did ensue, as though we had long restrained our passions. And at last, the floodgates did yield. The ensuing days passed in a haze, a fleeting shadow of time's swift passage. Leonard lingered near, ever seeking opportunities to graze against me or cast his gaze upon me when the eyes of others were averted. In quiet counsel, I would urge myself to cease, to withdraw, to bring to a close this affair that hath unfolded. Yet, each time mine eyes beheld him, I discerned the very solitude that had once enveloped my own heart. We were as two mirrors, each reflecting the same yearning, the same void, and I found myself unable to refuse. It was not my desire to do so. In the stillness of night, I would recline beside Phoenix, gazing upon the ceiling, attuned to the gentle rhythm of his breath. In contemplation of Leonard, who dwells in yonder chamber, I ponder the gentle touch of his hands and the vivifying essence he bestows upon my very soul once more. And then I would shut mine eyes, remorse coiling within my breast like a serpent. Alas, I foresaw its fleeting nature. I was aware of its folly. Yet I found myself unable to cease. The strain betwixt us swelled with each passing day, until at last it burst forth in a tempest of emotion. As the hour grew late, Phoenix toiled once more, while Isla lay in slumber, and Leonard and I found ourselves in the kitchen, engaged in our humble endeavors. As I engaged in the humble task of cleansing the dishes, striving to divert my thoughts from the tumult of the world, I sensed his presence looming behind me. I didst turn about, and lo, there he stood, gazing upon me as he had upon the shore. Leonard, I did implore with gentle voice, seeking to caution him, yet he heeded not my plea. He drew nigh, so near that I could sense the warmth of his breath upon my neck. Mother, he did softly utter, I find myself unable to cease my thoughts of thee. I found myself ensnared in a moment of stillness. Mine heart did race with such fervor, I feared it might rend asunder. I yearned to bid him cease, to retreat to his chamber, to grant me solitude, yet I did not. Instead, I gazed upon him, and uttered the singular phrase I ought not to have spoken. I find myself unable to cease as well. And thus did the hour arrive when all did unravel. Leonard pressed his lips to mine once more, with fervor that spoke of longing and urgency. And I returned his kiss. I held no concern for the wrongness of the deed. Mine heart held no regard for Phoenix, nor Isla, nor the life we had woven together. Mine heart was solely bound to him. Leonard, mine own progeny, the sole soul who bestowed upon me the sense of significance. Since that fateful day upon the shore, the tides of life have not returned to their former course. Verily, I find myself in doubt that they shall ever come to pass. Leonard and I have traversed a boundary, one that remains indelibly marked. Regardless of my fervent attempts to persuade myself to the contrary, what began as a fleeting instant hath transformed into a tempest I cannot master. The weight of remorse doth linger, ever present, yet it doth not hinder my resolve, and therein lies the essence of my greatest trepidation. Maybe they're too caught up in their own lives to see me slipping. Or maybe I've just gotten better at hiding it. But every time he touches me, every time he looks at me like I'm the only person in the world, I lose myself. I don't know if I can fix it. So please, if you have advice, if you've been in a situation like this, or know someone who has, I want to hear from you. Don't let your world fall apart before you realize what's happening. Like this video if you found it helpful, and subscribe for more.